Unveiling tax reform. Republicans release their plan for the first major tax overhaul in 30 years. The president's going abroad. We'll preview his visit to Asia with a report from the State Department. All Souls Day. Pope Francis honors veterans with a special mass at an American war cemetery in Italy. And honoring Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI with a new brew. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, November 2nd, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. House Republicans unveil their long-awaited tax plan, promising to slash your taxes and boost American jobs. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi tells us about what could be the first major revamp of the tax code in 3 decades.
The Republican plan slashes the corporate tax rate from 35% down to 20%. It also gets rid of some prized deductions, setting up a bitter battle here at the Capitol.
Republicans promise a leaner tax code that leaves you with more money.
We can simplify it so much that 9 out of 10 Americans can file using a postcard.
Speaker Paul Ryan says the typical middle-class family of 4 will get a tax cut of more than $1,100.
It can help you pay down your debt faster. It can help you start and renovate your home faster.
The Republican plan cuts the number of tax brackets from 7 to 4, with a 12% income tax rate for couples making up to $90,000, 25% for those making $90,000 to $260,000, and 35% for those making $260,000 to $1 million. And couples making over $1 million would face 39.6%.
I don't see a downside. I see it's great for the American people. I see it's great to create jobs. It's going to increase earnings.
Republicans also plan to phase out the so-called death tax on multi-million-dollar inheritances. That's personal for South Dakota's Kristi Noem, whose dad died in a farming accident.
About a month later, we got a bill in the mail from the IRS that said we owed death taxes. Now, we had land, we had cattle, we had machinery, but we didn't have any money in the bank.
Republicans say they also want to help families by increasing the child tax credit from $1,000 to $1,600. Catholic father of 5, Matt Schlapp, tells me that's good news.
Well, as we all know, it's awfully expensive to raise a child in this day and age. And the idea that the tax code is not so much giving you something when you have a child as they're letting you keep more of what you earn.
Representative Dave Bratt knows the plan still faces challenges.
But you're about ready to see the swamp come in because it gets rid of a lot of the special loopholes and deductions, and the cronies up here won't be happy.
Democrats say the bill favors the rich and also businesses. It will add $1.5 trillion to the national debt in the next decade, but President Trump calls it a great bill. He says he hopes the House passes it by Thanksgiving, and then he can sign it into law by Christmas. Here at the Capitol, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Tough talk from Attorney General Jeff Sessions about defending U.S. national security from terrorists. He adds he's not ruling out using U.S. military base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, to prosecute those terrorists.
If anyone has any doubt about it, they can ask the more than 500 criminals whom the Department of Justice has convicted of terrorism-related offenses since 9/11. And they can ask the dozens of enemy combatants at Guantanamo.
Sessions' remarks come days after Tuesday's fatal terror attack in New York City. He did not specifically bring up the suspect in this week's attack, which killed 8 people. On Twitter, the president wrote this morning that he would love to send the suspect to Guantanamo. He added, quote, "There is also something appropriate about keeping him in the home of the horrible crime he committed. Should move fast. Death penalty." President Trump nominates Federal Reserve Board member Jerome Powell as the next chairman of the nation's central bank. The announcement came this afternoon in the Rose Garden. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. Trump had considered renominating Janet Yellen, the first woman to lead the central bank, for a second 4-year term after her current term expires in February. But the president says he's putting his own mark on the Fed by nominating Powell for the job.
We need strong, sound, and steady leadership at the United States Federal Reserve. I have nominated Jay to be our next federal chairman, and so important because he will provide exactly that type of leadership.
Trump's selection of the 64-year-old Powell was described as a safe choice who could represent continuity at the Fed. If confirmed by the Senate, Powell would also be the first Fed leader in nearly 4 decades to lack an advanced degree in economics. He has served on the Fed board since 2012 after a career as an investment manager. Trump's choice of Powell marks the first time in nearly 40 years a president has not asked the current Fed chief to remain in charge. The Federal Reserve was founded by Congress in 1913 to provide the nation with a safe, flexible, and stable financial system. It regulates banks and other institutions and protects the rights of consumers. Lauren?
Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. President Trump leaves the White House tomorrow for the longest foreign trip of his presidency. He'll be kicking off a 5-nation tour of Asia. The president is pushing North Korea's neighbors to take a tougher stance against the communist nation. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee joins us with details from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Officials here at the State Department say diplomacy comes first when it comes to dealing with North Korea. It's one of the reasons why Secretary of State Rex Tillerson will travel with President Trump on his trip. The goal, to beef up ties with our allies in the region.
The United States remains committed to the complete, verifiable, and permanent denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster laying out one of the many issues on President Trump's plate as he prepares for his overseas trip.
The president's trip will focus on 3 goals. First, strengthening international resolve to denuclearize North Korea. Second, promote a free and open Indo-Pacific region. Third, advance American prosperity through fair and reciprocal trade and economic practices.
President Trump arrives Sunday in Japan, the first of 5 stops. There he'll meet with newly re-elected Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Abe says his country's national security is the worst since the end of World War II. That's because of North Korea's growing nuclear and missile threat. He wants more military cooperation between the U.S. and Japan. The nuclear issue remains key in the president's second stop, South Korea. Its president, Moon Jae-in, is pushing less for military cooperation. Instead, he favors talks with North Korea. President Trump will not visit the demilitarized zone, the border area between the North and the South. Earlier this year, the president caused concern when he said if North Korea makes any more threats to the U.S., they would be met with fire and fury. Christopher Hill is a former chief envoy for six-party talks.
I think there are a lot of advisors to President Trump who have cautioned him against using this kind of strong language.
Next stop for the president, China. There, the president will meet with Xi Jinping, who plays an important role amid tensions with North Korea. President Trump rounds out his trip with stops to Vietnam, then the Philippines, the largest Catholic country in Asia. Trump will meet with Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte, who has been accused of human rights violations for his war on drugs.
Administration officials say human rights issues will be a part of their discussions. Catholic leaders in the Philippines have sharply criticized Duterte for his bloody crackdown on drug dealers. Duterte has responded by accusing priests and bishops of corruption, womanizing, and other excesses, accusations church leaders have strongly denied. Lauren?
Wyatt, I also understand that the Philippine president is weighing in on the threat from North Korea. What is he saying about that conflict?
Yes, Lauren, President Duterte says nuclear war is totally unacceptable. It's why he says all partners should come to the table and find a solution. It sounds good in principle, but the United States and its allies say that getting the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and his regime to actually negotiate have really not worked. They have not been willing partners in the negotiations. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. The CIA releases a trove of documents captured during the raid that killed Osama bin Laden in 2011. It includes his personal journal. The 470,000 files are the latest addition to the public collection dubbed Bin Laden's Bookshelf. They include practice reels for public speeches and audio correspondence. You can find them at www.cia.gov/library. The U.S. Navy says 2 fatal collisions this summer involving its ships could have been avoided. 17 sailors were killed when the USS Fitzgerald and the USS John S. McCain collided with commercial ships. A Navy report blames what it calls numerous failures. In testimony before Congress, tech executives acknowledged their platforms were used by Russia to influence last year's presidential election. Representatives from Facebook, Google, and Twitter say Russian agents placed roughly 3,000 ads on the internet to try and create division during the 2016 U.S. election. The companies say since the election, they have made changes to how they sell ads. A United Nations report says ISIS committed, quote, international crimes during the Iraqi military's liberation of Mosul. The crimes include mass kidnappings and using civilians as human shields. A U.S.-led coalition helped liberate Mosul from ISIS in July. Thousands of Rohingya Muslims fleeing persecution are not being allowed into Bangladesh. Border guards say the refugees from the neighboring Myanmar do not have permission to enter. More than 600,000 Rohingya Muslims have left Myanmar since August. Christians can help dispel the fear surrounding migrants. That's what experts who are gathering in Rome to help refugees integrate into society say.
Certainly, it's one of the challenging factors in the overall culture is when a tragic event like the one in New York happened. It raises fears and concerns and anxieties. It reinforces negative stereotypes and therefore heightens our responsibility to challenge and clarify those stereotypes.
Organizers say there couldn't be a better time to emphasize the importance of education and integration. Juliette Lindley is EWTN News Nightly's Vatican correspondent. She joins us from Rome. Juliette, tell us how this conference sets itself apart from other meetings that are focusing on the integration of migrants.
So the key here, Lauren, is higher education. It's providing tertiary education for migrants and refugees. So universities, NGOs, and nonprofit organizations are getting together to focus on how to lift these people out of their difficulty by giving them an education and a profession so that they can specialize in something and become completely integral parts of a community. Now, statistics tell us that only 24% of refugees or migrants, that's only 1 in 4, has a secondary education, let alone a university degree. So the focus here is on trying to give them even a bachelor's or a master's or even a doctorate or PhD.
So it sounds like education is really key to making these migrants successful. What are the current challenges with education for migrants?
So we're looking at 2, if you want, main sections of migrants or refugees, and they come with each with their set of challenges. So the one sort of refugees that you have are the ones who are in refugee settlement camps. Now they're large. You can even have thousands of people who have been displaced by wars who are in these camps. And there, a traditional face-to-face education is impossible. So what today's conference was saying is that digital technology is the key, and we need to look at online formats. On the other hand, you have refugees who have arrived in a host country who are trying to integrate, and in that case the challenge is getting universities and colleges to open up to them and to accept migrants into their academic programs. Perhaps they don't have all the documentation that a usual applicant would have to get into university, and perhaps they don't have all the language skills, so exceptions need to be made on those fronts.
All right, Juliette, this is a fascinating topic about how to educate migrants who are coming into all of these different countries. As we know, that the key is really education. Thank you so much. Juliette Lindley, EWTN News Vatican correspondent.
Thank you, Lauren.
Pope Francis celebrates All Souls Day Mass at a U.S. military cemetery in southern Italy and calls war, quote, the destruction of ourselves. The Holy Father also says the white headstones should remind us, quote, no more of these useless massacres. The cemetery holds the remains of nearly 8,000 U.S. soldiers who died fighting the Nazis in World War II. Coming up, the Heartbeat Bill. I'll talk to one woman who testified on Capitol Hill about protecting the unborn. And celebrating the World Series. The Houston Astros take home the Commissioner's Trophy for the first time in the team's history. The University of Notre Dame is ending birth control coverage for employees and students starting next year. The move follows religious exemptions added to the federal contraceptive mandate. The former chief Supreme Court reporter for the New York Times reveals she made monthly donations to Planned Parenthood while working at the paper. In her new book, Linda Greenhouse writes about her donations to the country's largest abortion provider. She says her coverage was always fair. But pro-life group Susan B. Anthony List tells the Washington Times there was always a pro-abortion bias in her writing. Officials in Texas are defending new pro-life measures in court after a federal judge overturns a ban on a procedure used in second trimester abortions. The trial begins 2 months after a district judge temporarily blocked the state from enforcing the pro-life law passed by the Republican legislature. And thanks to an increase in pro-life lawmakers, including the president, the human costs of abortion are now more talked about publicly. But it's not just politicians talking. Joining us, syndicated columnist Star Parker, who provided testimony before Congress earlier this week. Thank you so much for joining us.
I love being with you, Lauren. You know that.
I love being with you, too. You said something so compelling yesterday. Slavery was, as abortion is, a crime against humanity. Like slavery, tension was created in the public square and in law concerning who qualified for natural rights worthy of protection. Very powerful. Representative Steve King, a Republican from Iowa, said he'd never heard that before.
Right. Well, you know, it's interesting. We rarely get to make our case for pro-life, for anti-abortion. Until now, there is a window of opportunity for us to address it before the Congress because the last 8 years the Congress had not been controlled by Republicans. Congressman King is a conservative, he's a Christian, and he's the chairman of the Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution and Civil
But how did you come up with
Justice.
that? Slavery, abortion.
It's not rocket science. As I commented when he asked the question, if you put Roe v. Wade next to the Dred Scott decision and take the titles off, they read almost verbatim. They're both about humanity. This is property, not a person. That's what we're dealing with today. So the more we're equipped to see what happened during slavery, the more opportunities we have to dismiss the ideas of the left when they challenge us about this is settled law. Well, everyone thought Dred Scott was settled law, and it wasn't.
You know, you said yesterday something very personal, and I'd like to play it on the air here for our viewers who know you well. And it is also very moving, goes to why you are where you are today. Let's take a listen.
I was one such woman. When years ago, lost in sexual recklessness, had 4 abortions without any counsel nor information from the abortion providers about the distinct humanity of the life that was growing within me.
Wow, quite impressive. Is that what brought you here? Why did you change your mind to lobby for pro-life legislation?
A Christian conversion changed my life. And it was fascinating as I believed all the lies of the left, everything they say, criminal activity I was engaged in as a result, sexual activity to land me in and out of abortion clinic after clinic. Interestingly, I went into the same clinic twice and they still didn't give me any information and he recognized me. But after a Christian conversion, I changed. And I received new information according to the scripture. And a couple of years into that conversion, the pulpit, the pastor mentioned abortion. And it was the first time I actually thought about it in my life. But because I had already heard that God was in Christ and that he was reconciling the world to himself, he doesn't count our sin against us, I knew that, well, this is sin, but he's also forgiven this as well. So I had an opportunity to address it with the Lord, to recover myself. But then I became very passionate to say, then let's stop others from having to get to this place to where then they have to repent from this horrible crime against humanity.
And now you're testifying on Capitol Hill.
I know, it's wonderful. Isn't
Star Parker, right? I know.
Oh my God.
That's right. That's right. That's true. President for the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. Thanks, Star.
You're welcome.
Well, congratulations to the 2017 World Series winners, the Houston Astros. Around 17,000 fans in Houston celebrated the team's first World Series title. The Astros won a decisive Game 7 over the LA Dodgers, 5-1. And our Wyatt Goolsby, who is from Houston, is mighty proud. The city also rallied around the team. And that, if you remember, that city is recovering from Hurricane Harvey. Up next, a consultant to the U.S. bishops resigns. We'll talk about the controversy with Rome correspondent Edward Penton, who joins us in studio. And cheers for the Pope Emeritus, how the former leader of the Catholic Church is being honored. Yesterday we honored all the saints. Today we honor the dead on All Souls Day. It's a day to pray for those in purgatory so they may enter into heaven. In Mexico, there are big celebration for Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead. A lack of burial space in India has more people considering cremation. The Times of India reports one diocese has no more space for permanent tombs. The Vatican approved cremation in 1963, though burial is still preferred. A theologian resigns from a U.S. Bishops' Conference committee after publishing a letter to Pope Francis asking the Holy Father to correct the, quote, chronic confusion of his pontificate. The USCCB says Father Thomas Winandi has resigned effective immediately. Joining us now in studio, not from the Vatican, is Edward Penton, our Rome correspondent for the National Catholic Register. Great to have you on set.
Great to be back with you.
What do you think about this Winandi controversy? Why did he write the letter, and why did the U.S. bishops react the way they did?
Well, it's an interesting story why he wrote it, because he said he'd had these concerns for a long time, concerns which he says are shared by many people about this pontificate and what he calls the chronic confusion that he says is being caused, and he places that at the feet of the Holy Father. But he said that he felt he wanted to write this letter. He sent it to the Pope at the end of July. He said he had a sign from God to say that he should send it, and he decided to make it public on All Saints.
And the bishops said, sorry, the Bishops' Conference said, you're sorry, we do not want you to be working for the conference anymore.
That's right. I mean, he was head of the doctrinal committee on the Bishops' Conference. He was still a consultant to them. But they said that there must be a strong sense of unity and loyalty to the Pope. And they felt that he couldn't stay on the committee if having written this letter.
Has the Pope said anything about this?
He hasn't, but they did acknowledge receiving the letter, and they said the letter had been placed in his hands, so he has read it. But he
didn't weigh in on any of this controversy yet. Let's move to another topic we just talked about. In India, there's a lack of space for burying Christians, and they're choosing cremation. The church says it okay, but is it?
Well, it has been okay, but it's not the preferred way of burial or the end of life. What they prefer is that there's burial because the temple, the body is the temple, and the Vatican has always said, as we're born in the image and likeness of God, that cremation is not the best way. But because there's been this growing demand for cremation, they've gradually allowed it in certain circumstances, and they have generally allowed it since the 60s.
But there are rules around it, aren't there?
Yes, and in fact they put out a document last year saying that you're not allowed to scatter ashes at sea, you're not allowed to keep ashes in an urn, but you are allowed to be cremated if you
and put them in a mausoleum or bury them or do something like that. Yes. Finally, I want to show you some great video. You missed it, I think, because you were here in the U.S. and not in Rome. It's the annual All Saints race that took place yesterday. The start was at St. Peter's Basilica, and the course took runners throughout the Eternal City. And it was really promoting a good cause. It's been around for several years. Tell us about that.
Yes, I think this is the 10th race. They have several different races at the Vatican like this, but this one was particularly for bringing awareness of child brides, especially in India. There's something like 47% of young girls are forced to marry under the age of 18, which is a large number, and it causes all sorts of problems. Yeah, psychological problems and all sorts of things. So they're keen to. It's a Don Bosco Salesian charity that's in charge of this.
And so they raise money through this race.
And they raise money for this through this race and awareness. Yes.
Okay, so we're not letting you go back to Rome. You're going to stay here. I have an office for you, and you're going to stay with us because your British accent is just so lovely.
Something at least.
Okay, Ed Penton, thank you so much, correspondent with the National Catholic Register.
Thank you.
Finally, tonight, a brewery in Ohio is honoring the Pope Emeritus with a new Benedict XVI beer. The beer, come on, here it comes, Benedict, was brewed for a festival at Franciscan University, honoring the former leader of the Catholic Church. Pope Benedict is known to enjoy a cold one. He was pictured in April celebrating his 90th birthday with a pint. That's what they say, Ed, right? A pint? A pint. Pint of ale. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. On this All Souls Day, we leave you with a look at the Teutonic Cemetery, a burial site adjacent to St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican. It's the site of the martyrdom of many early Christians during the Roman Empire. Good night, and God bless you.